morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're going to be taking a look at when Slowking broke the Pokemon trading card game. We had a look at how Sableye broke the Pokemon trading card game a little while ago. I'll link that video in the description. That was pretty popular. People want more of these kind of videos, or so some of you have told me, so I was like, right, time to have a little bit of a look at Slowking. So Slowking came around in Neo Genesis, which was released in English on December the 16th, 2000. And it lasted until late 2002, when Wizards, who were running the game at the time, went, no, let's not do it, ladies and gentlemen. He gone. And it was the last card that was specifically banned in proper organised play. There was a Wormadam we might mention later if we get a moment, until Lysander's Trump card was banned in 2015. So Slowking, what did it do? On the face of it, it looks kind of unassuming. It doesn't look like the best card ever. We have a stage 1 with 80 HP, which to be fair wasn't terrible at the time. You got to remember that back then cards were weaker. But even back then, free psychic energy, 20 damage, if heads, 30 damage plus confusion, if tails just 20, still wasn't great even back then. And the free psychic energy was rather expensive. But it wasn't about the attack, it was about the ability. Or as it was called back then, Pokemon Power, mind games. Whenever your opponent plays a trainer card, you may flip a coin. If heads, that card does nothing. Put it on top of your opponent's deck. This power can't be used if Slowking is asleep, confused, or paralyzed. Now, when it was released in Japan, it actually read, if Slowking is your active Pokemon, whenever your opponent plays a trainer card, you may flip a coin. If heads, that card does nothing. And it was mistranslated when it came out in English, and that, ladies and gentlemen, made all the difference. Because over in Japan, in order to use Slowking, it had to be your active Pokemon, which either meant it had to be active during your opponent's turn, and then you had to switch something else out for your turn, but then you would attack with that and Slowking wouldn't be in the active for their turn, so you couldn't even do that. Or you had to attack with Slowking. And as we've said, Slowking was not a particularly great attacker. Even if you left it in the active for several turns, you basically wouldn't be attacking other than with Slowking. Slowking wasn't a good enough attacker. Over in Japan, this was just not even an issue. It just wasn't a particularly good card. But it got mistranslated when it made it out over here, so that it worked on the bench. And this did two things. Firstly, it meant that you could attack with a card that wasn't Slowking. And secondly, it meant you could play up to 4 of them. The rule in Pokemon is that you can have up to 4 copies of any card in your deck other than basic energy, which is unlimited. So you can have 4 Slowpoke and 4 Slowking. And you have to lay down 6 random cards from your deck as prizes at the beginning of the game. And there's every possibility that a Slowpoke or a Slowking ends up prized. But even then, you'd be unlucky to have more than one of either of them prized, so generally speaking, you're going to have 3 or 4 out during the game. Now, if one Slowking is out every time your opponent plays a trainer card, they have a 50-50 chance of playing it, because you've got a 50-50 chance of hitting heads. But if you've got 2 Slowking out, then they need you to flip 2 tails, that is a 1 in 4 chance. With 3 Slowking out, they need you to flip 3 tails, that's a 1 in 8 chance. And with 4 Slowking out, they need you to flip 4 tails in a row in order to use a trainer card. That is a 1 in 16 chance. That means that for every 16 trainers they try to play, 1 is actually going to work. It means there is a 6.25% chance of any trainer card actually working when your opponent plays it. And what's even worse and more disgusting about this is that it went onto the top of your opponent's deck. If it went into their hand, they could at least try and play all their trainer cards every turn, but because it went on top of their deck, what would happen is they'd try and play 3 trainer cards. Statistically, they'd probably all fail. And then all 3 of them would be on top of their deck. So they'd just keep drawing the ones on top of their deck rather than actually drawing any new cards at the start of the turn, which could help them. And this just completely shut decks down. The general rule was that either you played multiple Slowking or you lost. And then, of course, whoever set up their Slowking first had a gigantic advantage because your opponent would be trying to play trainer cards to set up their Slowking, but they wouldn't be able to because you had your Slowking. And it was actually even worse because back then, trainer was everything. Nowadays, we got different categories. So we've got stadium cards. Think something like Shrine of Punishment sees a lot of play. We've got supporter cards. Think stuff like Cynthia. And we've got item cards. Think something like Switchraft. And what we see is item cards, you can play as many of them as you like during your turn. Stadiums, you can play 1 during your turn, and it affects both players. Supporter cards, you can only play 1 during your turn, unless you play something like Lieutenant Surge's Strategy that allows you to play an extra one. But back when Neo Genesis was a thing, it was just trainers. So you had ridiculous things. I mean, if we look at the base set, we can see some truly weird things, like Professor Oak, which is functionally exactly the same as Professor Sycamore, or Juniper. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. Except it was a trainer card, so you could play it as much as you like. I mean, we had Bill back then that just drew you 2 cards, which was utterly phenomenal as a speed card to get through your deck nice and fast. But then when Bill was reprinted as a supporter card, it was utter garbage and no one ever played it, due to the fact that it was, in fact, utter garbage. If we had Slowking nowadays, and it just stopped item cards, well, that would be fine. We did incidentally go through a stage during like the Heart Gold Soul Silver phase where you can see Bill there is actually a supporter, whereas Cynthia nowadays is a trainer supporter. So we started off with everything being trainers, then they were all their own categories. Nowadays they are all subcategories of trainers. So Shrine of Punishment, for instance, is a trainer stadium. So if it only affected item cards, what trainers basically are nowadays in a weird kind of roundabout way, then it wouldn't be so bad. You could still use supporter cards, you could still play stadiums, you would be all right. You could maybe make something work. I mean, there's plenty of item lock at the moment that just stops you playing item cards at all. The new Behemoth springs to mind. But you can still play supporter cards. It's not the end of the world. Omastar also is pretty darn good. Now, to be fair, right, it'll still shut a bunch of decks down. I was playing Granbull the other day. My opponent dropped an Omastar and there was literally no way I could win. Because you need to empty your hand with Granbull. That's not an option. With Slowking, you could play anything in your hand, as long as your opponent flipped between 1 and 4 tails. It literally got to the point where you would have games that just went on and on and on, because every time anybody tried to do anything, they just could not ever get a trainer card working. It ruined the game. And imagine you're playing in this game. This isn't fun. No one enjoys this kind of game. Nobody wants to play Slowking. You play Slowking because if you don't play Slowking, you can't win. So you play Slowking. But nobody actually wants to play or enjoys playing Slowking. It literally broke the game because the whole point is you're supposed to be able to play trainer cards. And now you had to rely on your opponent flipping multiple tails in order to actually play a single trainer card. And when I say broke the game, I mean the game no longer functioned in the way that it was supposed to. It got banned in 2002, so it was legal for a little while. And we've not seen anything even remotely like it since. Nor should we, incidentally. The other thing to remember is this is back in the early days of the Pokemon trading card game. This is before even the Pokemon Company took over the running of the Pokemon trading card game. This is back when it was still Wizards of the Coast. As a fun side note, it was also the first game that introduced Pokemon from Gold and Silver. Until then, it had just been Gen 1 all the way. So, yeah. Slowking was mistranslated. Now, they could have fixed that by actually just introducing an errata, which they've done a few times in the history of the game. Rare Candy used to allow you to evolve straight up into a stage 2 without having to wait a turn, but Rare Candy nowadays, you have to wait a turn. The Pokemon has to be down for a turn before you can actually play it. Now, they've since printed newer versions of Rare Candy that no longer need the errata because they just read like they should. But initially, it was fixed with an errata, and they've done that a bunch. They could have done that with Slowking. Nowadays, if Slowking came out, I think they would. Just change it so it had to be active, especially given that it was a mistranslation. But for those couple of years, Slowking broke the Pokemon trading card game. So were you playing back then? Do you have any memories? If so, let me know in the comment section. If not, what do you think about this, and how terrified would you be if this got reprinted just like it was nowadays? Go nuts in the comment section, ladies and gentlemen, but please do remember to be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where we talk about a whole bunch of games that don't even have any Pokemon in. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.